and that the camp violated a provision of Dr. Goodale's gift. The governor was William Dennison, a Columbus resident and undoubtedly a good friend of the city's wealthiest benefactor. Less than 2 weeks later, the camp was moving to a site west of the city that would be shortly named Camp Chase. On June 3rd, the park was reported as vacant, and by contemporary accounts in newspapers and city council minutes, there was little damage done to the trees or to the park property. While used as a camp, several buildings were erected. There was a 400-foot-long barracks having no windows, a guardhouse, a mess hall, and a kitchen. The barracks had bunks which slept 4 or 5 men. The camp buildings were dismantled, and the lumber was reused at Camp Chase.
Terry, what can you tell us about other things that were happening in the vicinity of Goodale Park during those early park years?
In 1853, Dr. Goodale gave 4 acres and $5,000 for the construction of the first building for Capital University. In the picture, it is in the foreground where Interstate 670 now passes. The school remained there until the mid-1870s, when the university moved to its present location on East Main Street. Jenny Lind, the internationally renowned singer, gave the school $1,000 during a concert visit to the city. About the same time, this house was built on 30 acres directly north of the park. The earliest houses around the park were built on Park Street. This one was occupied by former Governor Dennison, later by O.G. Peters, an industrialist, and finally by the United Commercial Travelers Association. Just north was another house that later became the Parkview Sanitarium.
You've told me there were lots of changes in the park during the 1870s. Would you describe that to our audience?
Dr. Goodale died in 1868, and the city had increased in size and prosperity as a result of war prosperity. The council committee that managed the park undertook several ambitious projects during the 10 years after Lincoln Goodale's death. In 1870, the main gate was constructed at a cost of $1,800. A fountain was constructed in the south central portion of the park. It was a rock fantasy, popular at the time, about 15 feet high, in a pool about 30 feet in diameter. Much activity focused on a natural depression at the northeast corner of the park. Between 1872 and 1875, the lake was built in that depression and was about 50% larger than it is presently, extending further to the south. The delay in finishing the lake was attributed to spending money on other projects. Prior to starting the lake, a refreshment house was constructed on the high west bank of the future lake. The lake house was leased to concessionaires and could be rented by groups. The building was 2 stories high and was surrounded with a veranda on both levels. After the turn of the century, a large island was installed in the East Lake for use by swans and ducks. The fountain, now in the lake, was built in 1933 as a federal relief project. From 1873 to 1886, the park had a menagerie that at various times included bears, wolves, foxes, rabbits, and an eagle. Originally, the animals were housed near the caretaker's house, but in 1877, the city constructed the buildings to the left of this picture. The shed with 3 arches held the animal cages, and an adjacent barn was for the park horse and park equipment, like the mowing machine. The boathouse at the north end of the lake was built in 1882, and the building barely visible behind the boathouse was a privy. This is the appearance of the park in 1876, with the lake house by the East Lake and the fountain shown in the large circle near the south side.
You've told me about a number of other changes to the park in the 1890s. Could you tell us more about those?
After 15 years of talk and planning, the city and the heirs of Lincoln Goodale jointly unveiled a bust